The top dogs of the Red River Conference, Austin Blacks and Dallas Reds, leave the Lone Star State for the Midwest, where they will match up with the Midwest Premiership's Chicago Griffins and Metropolis, respectively. Lafayette, Colorado. The second and final weekend of cross-conference competition in the 2016-17 Rugby Gold Cup comes to a head this weekend in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The two top dogs of the Red River Conference, Austin Blacks and Dallas Reds, leave the Lone Star State for the Midwest, where they will match up with the Midwest Premiership's Chicago Griffins and Metropolis, respectively. The two Texas teams proved their superiority during the 2015-16 Gold Cup, as Austin took first place ahead of Dallas on its way to a second consecutive appearance in the U.S.A. Rugby Division I National Championship. This year's competition between two of club rugby's most competitive conferences has taken a slightly different shape. However, the Chicago Griffins replaced the Kansas City Blues after a second-place finish in the 2016 Midwest playoffs. Meanwhile, a Red River representative still sits atop the Gold Cup standings, but Metropolis is holding strong in second and hopes a successful weekend in Minneapolis, along with some help from the Blacks, can launch the club to first place ahead of the Reds. The first set of cross-conference fixtures took place the first weekend of March in Austin, Texas. The Midwest sides not only had to overcome the travel to Texas but also their limited opportunities to train outdoors prior to heading south. As a result, the Blacks and Reds combined for a 3-1 record over the weekend, but Metropolis more than held its own. A late try by Dallas ruined Metropolis' chance of a March 3 draw to open the weekend, but the men of Minneapolis did not let that dampen their spirits ahead of the March 5 match against Austin. Wing Melvin DeSouza dotted down twice and Metropolis earned a 32-12 road win over the Blacks to earn a weekend split against Red River's best. The two pairs of conference rivals enter the second leg of the Gold Cup coming off contrasting results. Chicago and Metropolis were harshly welcomed back to the Midwest Premiership, playing their first conference games since November. The Griffins could not beat Kansas City at home, losing to the Blues 41-22, while Metropolis traveled to Palmer College and lost 23-19. A lack of consistency hurt us. I don't think we stuck to the game plan enough to beat a team like Palmer, explained Metropolis head coach Nate Osborne. They're a hard team to beat on the road, and I think they were more enthusiastic than us. Like Metropolis, Chicago is fielding a much younger side than it is used to, and it has come with some growing pains. Cleaning up our set-piece execution and playing our pattern also should lead to more favorable results, said Griffins president Charlie Jacobson. While we haven't achieved the early spring success we were hoping for, we feel that small issues with execution that can be easily corrected will have us back on the right path. On the contrary, both Texas clubs showed good form in the Red River last week before shifting their focus to the Gold Cup. Dallas went to Houston and toppled HARC 62-7, while Austin was in Dallas where it doubled up the Harlequins 52-26. Still, as well as the Blacks and Reds have been playing this season, the two clubs are keeping an eye on key players nursing nagging injuries. Austin has been continuously hit injuries since the new year and has been testing players from its DI and DII sides all season. Those opportunities will continue this weekend with plenty of youngsters making the trip to the Midwest. Sometimes when you give young guys a chance they surprise you, and that's been the case this year, said Blacks head coach and occasional fly half-tane Jerry Sevuk. Regardless of the strength of the team making the trip north, Austin is very motivated by the opportunity to challenge itself over the weekend as well as build camaraderie from the lengthy trip. We're excited for the Gold Cup competition, the opportunity to travel and bring a group of boys together for some team building and play a bit of rugby. It is a similar situation in the Reds camp. 5 key players in the Dallas lineup are fairly banged up. A few DI players have been called up, and while the limping regulars are making their trip, the hope is that they will be lightly used reserves Friday night against a Metropolis team that deserves the Reds' full attention. They play a physical game of rugby and they play very well, Reds head coach Reese Ball noted of Metropolis. They've got a big forward pack that likes to go forward, and they've got some good, fast backs. Dallas will counter with long-time danger man Kelly Kohlberg on the wing and loose forward Chad Joseph, who Ball says is probably the most outstanding player we have in a complete open flanker. Additionally, captain and lock Johnny Herron and powerful center Jake Kempe are also in tremendous form. The Blacks and Red are both gunning for 2 wins this weekend, but are being understandably cautious with their selections. The longtime rivals, along with the Austin Huns, are in a 3-team battle for the 2017 Red River Championship. The Midwest teams are not without their bumps and bruises either. Most detrimental has been the loss of Metropolis 8-man Jake Luetgers. Although expected back for the tail end of the Midwest season, Luetgers was sorely missed in the team's loss to Palmer and will not be available this weekend due to a shoulder injury. He's a big loss for us, admitted Osborne. He's very dynamic off the back of the scrum. He gives us very good go-forward ball and he's very solid in defense. Metropolis hopes the absence of Luetgers, who showed very well in previous Gold Cup outings, will be made up for with the availability of Jack Finnegan and Paseli Rinakama, neither of whom made the trip to Texas earlier in the month. Finnegan is an experienced centre from the Gold Coast of Australia, while Rinakama has been a massive threat in the number 10 jumper all season, but was unavailable to travel with the team to Texas. The Griffins currently sit at the bottom of the Gold Cup standings, but they have their share of players the Texas teams will be wise to keep an eye on. Eric Jacobson captains the team from the second row and leads from the front with his relentless work rate, while a move to the backs has taken Scott Peterson's game to a new level. The former 8-man has found a new home in the centres and has responded with 9 tries on the season. Then, of course, there is the return of 39-time capped Eagle Andrew Sunula. The Rugby World Cup veteran is back in the Windy City and running with his old club as a player and coach, but using his immense experience to feature at fly half rather than his international position of inside centre. Ireland will host the 8th Women's Rugby World Cup this August, 26th years since the USA Women's Eagles won the first World Championship in 1991. Each Thursday leading up to the tournament, USA Rugby will be taking a look at the history of the WRWC and the Eagles' performances through the years. To coincide with the 30th anniversary of the first the United States International and 2017 Can-Am Series, this is a special breakdown of the American-Canadian rivalry. By the time the USA Women's Eagles shocked rugby powers England and New Zealand on the way to a Women's Rugby World Cup win in 1991, the United States had already proven to its neighbor to the north it was a dominant force in international rugby. Just 16 international women's matches had been played prior to the first Can-Am matchup in 1987, when both countries made their debuts. The men's Eagles were 2-1-8 against Canada in a 10-year span leading up to the fall of 1987, when the first squad of women's Eagles joined their trip to Victoria, British Columbia. Perhaps excited at the prospect of its national men's team continuing a streak of victories over the Americans, but more likely ready for women to take the stage, the city turned out in force at a welcoming ceremony for all 4 teams. Victoria's first female mayor, Gretchen Bruin, recognized the women for their commitment and sacrifice. Within days and, eventually, years, it was apparent those same women and those to follow would follow suit. Though the men lost their 4th rivalry match on the trot, the women's Eagles began a 9-match winning streak against Canada in a 22-3 defeat north of the border. I think it was the shortest game of my life. Starting lock Robin Pace, Eagle number 12, said of her only Eagles appearance, "You're so amped up, so excited about playing in a crowded stadium. There were several thousand people there, but it felt like 80,000 in Florida State Stadium or something. All of a sudden it was halftime, then all of a sudden it was over. We trained so hard, we're so fit. It was exciting that we won. I can't tell you how exciting it was." The occasion may have been bigger than the rivalry itself in that instance, as it kicked off the team's historic timeline on the international stage. It was slow to begin with, as the Eagles played just 2 more matches in the 2 years to follow, but they were further victories against Canada in Saranac Lake, NY, and Edmonton, Alberta. The rivalry was renewed in 1992, with the Eagles bearing the World Cup winner title in Minnesota in their first match since the triumph in Wales. That match was close, 13-12, but the 93 encounter that brought the first Canada Cup to an end put a marker on the gap between the two nations, 60-3. At the time, the major sporting rivalry between the United States and Canada was in ice hockey, where professional athletes in the NHL from both countries created nothing short of a battle of superpowers at the international level. Compared to the rest of the world, especially with the fall of the Soviet Union, they were the benchmark for the sport. As Tier 2 nations in men's rugby, the two were middling sides in a sport dominated by the thoroughbreds. In the women's game, however, the Eagles were a force of change. Other nations had to up their own support, their own preparations for international competition. As the gap between the Eagles and other countries lessened at World Cups, so did the U.S.A.'s supremacy over Canada. The Canadians won 3 of 6 matchups between the 98 World Cup, the last time the Eagles reached a final, and the 2002 World Cup, where they also finished 4th to the U.S.A.'s 7th. This was split in the next quadrennial to bring the overall record in favor of the Americans to 13-5, before momentum swung Canada's way around the 2006 and 2010 World Cups. "We had a really experienced team going into the 2006 World Cup," former Eagles captain and all-time caps lead Jamie Burke, Eagle number 137, said. "Much more so than Canada. After it ended it was like a massive retirement from international play happened. We went on tour in 2007 and played against 2006 finalist England with 19 new caps. It was a really green team going into the next ramp-up." Canada's Heather Moyse led the 2006 tournament in Canada in points and tries scored, and was level on most tries in England in 2010. A young, talented Eagles squad that endured a rough patch of 8 consecutive losses through the first match of the 2009 Nations Cup following the 2006 exodus, though unable to qualify for the top 4 out of pool play, was given a shot at ending Canada's upswing in the rivalry in the World Cup's 5th place match. "The games that stood out to me the most in my career were World Cup games in general," Burke said, "but the fact it was a Canada game and a World Cup made it much more of an epic World Cup game than it otherwise would have been if we were playing a Scotland or an Ireland because of the history that was being played out there." Using a few notes gained from a 2009 Nations Cup matchup, the U.S.A.'s first Can-Am victory since 2006, and 4 matchups in the World Cup year, the Americans shut Canada down in the second half to prevail, 23-20. The rivalry somewhat took a backseat in the years to follow as the teams traveled abroad more often, meeting only at Nations Cup in 2011 and 2013. The Eagles won the latter matchup, but it was Canada that stole the show at the 2014 World Cup, finishing runner-up in a momentous final against England. The advent of the Women's Rugby Super Series in 2000 2015 and 2016 welcomed powerful nations England, France, and New Zealand to North America, but the most attended games were between Canada and the Eagles. Canada Day 2015 was stolen by the United States in Red Deer. Canada Day 2015 was stolen by the United States in Red Deer, Alberta, before Canada got one back in Salt Lake City last year. I like to be in tune with the team. Current Eagles captain Tiffany Faye, Eagle number 246 and a native of New Zealand, said, "I can feel it from them that Canada's the team to beat. I bounce off of that like, yeah, let's go do it. Especially that first game, coming off the bench, my first cap, the minute we came off the field with points and seeing the girls' faces, I knew it was a big deal. That was my introduction into the rivalry. That set the bar for me. Well, we have to keep doing that every time we meet. We just couldn't get the results the last two. We're getting there." Following Tuesday's match in Chula Vista, California, the U.S.A. lead in the rivalry, once 9-0, has been cut to 18-17. The younger players coming through the ranks, however, have enjoyed some successes against their counterparts across the border. The AIG Women's Junior All-Americans won their two most recent matches against Canada's under-20s in 2015, a different group of young women than the AIG Women's Collegiate All-Americans that beat two Ontario regional sides a year earlier, a team that included 5 Eagles in this month's Can-Am player pool. The girls' high school All-Americans powered by Atavis, which played its first matches in 2015, is in all matches played against Canadian opposition in both 7s and XVs. There's something to be said for having that international experience at whatever age grade you're at, and having winning experience, Burke said. You learn what it is to win at the international level. I think the reason it took us so long to build back from the 2007 struggles was that we had a lot of folks that had their confidence sort of squished. I think these age grade kids who are coming into the program are having that experience of winning internationally, which means, as they move up, they're like, no, I know how to win. That mentality translates over as you move up and progress through the ranks. The 36th rivalry match kicks off Saturday, April 1st, 29 years, and about 5 months from the first.